Hello and welcome to Macros with Mythili, the ET Now show that takes a hard look at all the major macroeconomic issues and developments in India overseas. Well, at the moment, nothing it seems can get bigger than this. Just when the global economy seems to be on the verge of recovery, geopolitical tensions are casting an ominous shadow. Last time there was a similar ratcheting up of tensions was in early 2015, but the world economy weathered that, only to now be faced with possibly worse storm clouds. So in this episode, we're going to take a look at the gathering geopolitical tensions. Will they scupper the ongoing economic recovery? To discuss this, I have with me two of the best brains on the subject. Shyam Saran, former Foreign Secretary who also served as a PM Special Envoy for Climate Change, and Rajat Nag, former Managing Director, Asian Development Bank. Let me start with you, Ambassador Saran. Are the fears of mounting geopolitical tensions exaggerated? Is this just part of the jousting that one normally sees amongst countries, albeit at a more elevated level? Is it mere brinksmanship from what can be sure the countries will inevitably pull back in the past, or can we no longer be so sure?
I would say that we can no longer be sure because I think the kind of uncertainties which have now emerged in the world, these uncertainties I cannot see how in the near future they can be resolved. At best we can hope for is how we can perhaps manage them so that they don't spill over into escalated conflict or even clash of arms. I think that is what we feel a little anxious about, that if you take, for example, what is happening on the Korean Peninsula with the ratcheting up of pressure from the United States, and given the fact that the United States has made it very clear that if North Korea develops a capability which is able to sort of attack the US mainland itself, then it would be obliged to, to try and destroy that capability. Now, it doesn't seem as if Kim Jong-un is backing off, and is China really able to in some way restrain its ally? These are all question marks, that we do not really
and there are bigger question marks than in the past, you feel?
Yes, I don't think we have faced this level of tension, this level of a kind of a clash of interests as we are seeing today on the Korean Peninsula. So that is certainly a big hotspot.
Okay.
And if this tension continues, obviously this will have an impact on the world economy. Quite apart from what is still, a very, very difficult and a very unstable situation in the Gulf and the Middle East.
Absolutely. Rajat, would you agree with that assessment, or do you think this time it's different? Because the fact is that the world has not really seen a major war since the Second World War ended. Rajat?
I could not agree more with Ambassador Saran. You're right, this is a very difficult time, particularly because, as Ambassador Saran very rightly said, it's also very unpredictable. We have got Mr. Trump and the North Korean leadership talking, I think, recklessly, and sometimes these things just paint into a corner and make you do things you know you shouldn't or you wouldn't under better times. So yes, I think we are in for some uncertainty, great uncertainty. The only thing I would hope for is that better counsel and wiser counsel will prevail. On the global economic side, Mythili, we are still looking at a 3.1% growth in 2017 and 2018, which is not the same as it was in the pre-crisis level, but still fairly robust. But the US economy has already the forecasts have already been downgraded. We are now looking at 2.1% growth in 2017, down from 2.5 just a few months back. So the political uncertainties, the tensions that you have mentioned, that Ambassador Saran has mentioned, are all going to weigh down quite heavily, I think.
Okay, Ambassador Saran, Rajat agrees with you entirely on this issue. But the fact is the Middle East has been a perennial source of tension. It's a political hotspot. Now, to that Middle East, should we add other countries like North Korea, China, maybe even the US? Am I imagining things? Have the number of hotspots increased? How would you like to list them, especially in terms of their intensity?
Yes, there are more hotspots today than we have had in the past. There is no doubt about that. Now, you mentioned the Middle East. Yes, there has been tension in the Middle East for quite a long time. One may even argue that perhaps the Iraq war is coming finally to an end. But then what happens to IS? The Islamic State may be in fact fragmenting and spreading even further and may be more difficult to control. So that is an uncertainty. Now we are seeing a clash amongst the Gulf countries themselves. You see what is happening between Qatar and Saudi Arabia and UAE, or the possibility that with the new sanctions which Trump has put on Iran, and the likelihood that the pressure on Iran may increase, would the nuclear deal, which was very painstakingly negotiated between Obama and the Iranian government, will that start unraveling? If it starts unraveling, then you have yet another source of tension in the region. India, China. Well, India, China, we would have hoped that there would not be any increase in tensions, but we are seeing increase in tensions on the border. So if you take what's happening in Korea, take what's happening in the Gulf itself, if you see what is maybe happening between India and China, and added to this, a government in the United States, which is by its very nature become a source of instability and source of unpredictability itself.
But rather the fact is that just last week, global equity markets were hit by a risk-off sentiment after tensions ratcheted up like this, following the sharp exchange of words between the top officials of North Korea and the US. How much of this impact will all the saber rattling, you were to call it that, have on economic performance? You've already spoken about how the US performance has come down a little bit. Or have global capital markets learned to look through all this noise? Because after all, Argentina, which is long a pariah in international capital markets, raised 100-year money recently and a fairly attractive rate of interest. And so did Iraq, a war-torn country which raised as much as $1 billion at 6.75%. And the interest was also, in fact, from the global investors was much more than the issue amount. So is it that global capital has learned to look through all these tensions?
Well, Mythili, the global capital does have an ability to look through, as you said, and these issues are discounted to some extent. But I think the key thing here, as Ambassador Saran has very rightly emphasized, is unpredictability. The capital markets can work some of these things through, but some of these issues that we are now facing are something which can change at a very short notice. And then there is an immediate impact, say, on the oil price, and that will have an immediate impact on the global economy. But I would like to also mention that in addition to the global political tensions, military tensions that we're discussing, there are economic factors at play. The US economy is being sort of slightly downgraded, not only because of these political tensions and uncertainties, but also because domestically, the fiscal stimulus that one had expected to come from the US in terms of greater infrastructure spending, in terms of greater fiscal stimulus, tax cuts, is now looking more uncertain, and the possibilities are looking a bit more remote. There is also the monetary policy, not only in the US, but in the global scene, which is probably going to be normalized, and therefore there may be tightening in the global financial conditions. There is Brexit. I think the whole impact of the Brexit negotiations on UK is already beginning to be felt, and IMF has downgraded its growth forecast for UK already for this year to about 1.7% or so. So I think in addition to the political tensions, the uncertainties that we're talking about, there is also the global economic uncertainties. And I must say that the risk profile overall, political, economic, and others, are skewed to the downside. So I think globally we are looking at some storms. Whether this will scupper the global recovery, I'm not sure. I don't think so, but it will certainly affect it negatively.
Pastor Saran, even if we don't see an actual outbreak of war, there's definitely a rise in the kind of Cold War tensions, particularly with Trump talking about fire and fury against North Korea, and North Korean leader saying that he will retaliate, etc. But the fact is that normally when you have these tensions, countries turn inwards. And the US has already withdrawn from climate change, from WTO. So how much worse can it get in terms of affecting the economy as such?
Oh, well, we would hope that it doesn't get worse than what it is. But let me point to the fact that as far as the global economy is concerned, there are bright spots, as you yourself mentioned, and Rajat has said that China is growing still at the rate of about 6.5% per annum. And it's a very large economy. It's today a 11 trillion economy. So it has a much bigger weight in the global economy. The fact is that India is also, despite some setbacks, is also growing at a fairly rapid rate. So you have two very large emerging economies which are still ticking away in a sense at a fairly rapid pace. But I think we have to also recognize that if you look a little ahead, then certainly Chinese economy is slowing down and it is likely to slow down further. That is inevitable. You cannot sustain that kind of a high growth rate. So what would a slowing Chinese economy mean, particularly if the recovery that we are seeing in the global economy becomes somewhat uncertain? For the reasons that is Brexit, there is uncertainty within the domestic economy itself in the United States of America. The kind of recovery we would have expected, say, in Japan has not quite taken place, and the structural reforms that were supposed to take place have really not gone very far. So if you are looking a little ahead, despite the fact that there is considerable amount of liquidity which is sloshing around in a sense in the world, and which is leading to higher asset prices, I think this is creating a bit of an illusion of, economic health. While if we are looking at slightly longer term trends, this outlook does not seem to be so good.
But you don't think the US will disengage from multilateral fora even more because of these Cold War kind of tensions?
Well, the US under Trump has already said that it will America first means what? That the kind of linkages, the engagement that the United States was typically supposed to be as a global power, supposed to be engaged in, it is not happening anymore. And who is going to take the place of the United States? I mean, that also is a problem, that if the US starts retreating, is any other power in a position to actually fill that gap? I would say at the moment, no. And neither do you have multilateral processes at the moment which are robust enough to be able to take that slack. In fact, multilateralism in a sense is also in retreat. You mentioned, for example, the WTO. Multilateral processes which had a certain traction before, say on climate change, other global issues, precisely at a time when you need those kind of global responses, collaborative responses, you have actually come to a point where there are much more competitive sort of sentiments at work, where countries, not just the United States, but you have this kind of nationalism cropping up everywhere.
Well, not too many bright spots, but there are a few. That is the verdict from both Raj as well as Ambassador Saran. But I'm afraid it's time for us to slip into a very short break. But please do stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and we're discussing how geopolitical tensions gathering storms on the global sphere could impact the global recovery that's slowly taking place. Rajat, the fact is, as you mentioned, and I also spoke earlier, markets have been remarkably resilient. Of course, there's been a short-term adjustment now, but nothing, it seems, can really end the party. And even though, as I said, stock markets have recently fallen, the fact is that they've run way ahead of fundamentals. In fact, writing in the Financial Post, journalist Joe Chidley had said, and I quote, "For now, the muted market response suggests investors are largely following the lessons of history, both of nuclear standoffs and markets. But maybe this time it's different. If Kim is serious about bombing Guam, he's clearly a madman. And Trump, unfortunately, is no JFK. Both are erratic, unpredictable, impulsive. So you have to wonder, are investors taking the doomsday scenario seriously enough?" Rajat?
I think, Mythili, let me just link up with what Ambassador Saran said. I think that was a very important point, and that is exactly at the time when we need multilateralism, exactly at the time when the world needs greater cooperation, we are seeing less of it. And yes, US obviously is giving up a position of its unique sort of, influence. And as Ambassador Saran, others aren't quite ready. So we are seeing the emergence of a multipolar world, but it'll take time for that multipolarity to come in place. And excepting for Europe, and that too in the Eurozone, where we're seeing some coherence and some cooperation other than UK, you're seeing basically too many flashpoints, too many discords, be it in Asia. Ambassador Saran talked about India, China. There's also the whole issue of South China Sea and China's relationship with some of its neighbors in the region. So I think what you are seeing is a time of great uncertainty because of great lack of cooperation. As a matter of fact, pulling back from the multilateralism, getting into protectionism, which nobody can win. So therefore, leading to the point you are asking, Mythili, I think there is hope, and people in the financial markets probably are hoping a bit too much.
Okay.
And I think they're somehow hoping that rationality will prevail. But I will submit that what Mr. Trump or the North Korean leadership and others are doing from their point of view is probably very rational. The North Korean leadership sees the nuclear arsenal as absolutely necessary, essential for their survival. So I think it will be a mistake to write off Kim Jong-un and others as being irrational. They may be irrational from your and my point of view. I think they're very rational from their point of view. And similarly, Mr. Trump, he is playing to a political base, and he's being very rational and consistent on that. So I think the world is probably, particularly financial world, is probably being a bit too blasé about the risks that I'm seeing, and I think what Ambassador Saran has very eloquently also outlined. Hopefully, these will get managed, but the forum for managing these, which is multilateralism, which is cooperation, is diminishing.
Okay. That is true. So financial markets are clearly displaying irrational exuberance. But Ambassador Saran, now if I were to turn to our immediate neighborhood, the kind of tensions that we're seeing between India and China, what do they mean for Asia and particularly for growth in India, particularly as this comes at a time when the US is gradually withdrawing its engagement from this part of the world? So how worried should we be about this? Is this just a standoff that we can brush aside, or will it have serious implications for the economy?
Well, at this point of time, things have not been resolved.
Will they escalate?
They could.
Okay.
They could. I mean, I think it would be unwise on our part to take the view that this is just a storm in the teacup and we don't need to really worry about it. Because this has been a somewhat longer standoff than we have seen in the past. Secondly, the level of rhetoric which we are seeing from the Chinese side. The kind of vitriol which is coming out, for example, in the Chinese media, it is different from what we have seen before. Because
does China feel that they can do this because Trump is not the kind of person who will intervene?
Well, I don't think it is merely an issue of whether Trump can intervene or not. I don't know whether in the past also one could have relied upon the US to intervene on India's behalf. I think India will have to deal with these challenges on its own. And that points to the need for having the kind of capabilities you need, not one-to-one in terms of matching what China has, but at least have a capability which makes it risky for the other side to engage in any kind of adventurism on India's borders.
Such situations increase the case, buttress the case for increased military spending, which is not in our interest, because we need bridges and dams.
That is what I was coming to, because when you are faced with a security challenge like this, naturally it takes priority over many other
developmental needs,
needs that you have. So it may not have an immediate impact, but the fact is that if there is a sense that maybe we have not taken the Chinese threat seriously enough. at a time when we are also facing a similar challenge on the border with Pakistan. That will mean that we have to devote more resources to building up our capabilities. And yes, that will mean that in terms of choices that we make, on how to deploy our resources, there will be maybe some shift of resources to non-economic uses.
So there is a cost, Rajat, but after the Trump victory, the general consensus really was that the dollar would strengthen. But what we've seen really is the currency weakening. And as a result, countries like India and other emerging market countries, our currencies have strengthened, resulting obviously in exports being hit. So should we really worry about that also be impacting economic performance in the rest of the world?
Yes, indeed. I think what you are seeing probably is a shift in people's perception of the US as the safe haven. It still is, and I think in terms of a crisis, people will still rush to gold and the US dollar. But I think one of the reasons that you're seeing a weakening of the US dollar is people are beginning to rethink that. And I think this is what will mean that, again, moving from a unipolar to a multipolar world, the US dollar will not have the same sort of place as it has had for a long time. Obviously, it will remain important, but the euro, the Japanese yen, and over time the Chinese renminbi, and maybe even in the far into the future, or not too distant future, the Indian rupee. So you will probably see this adjustment happening in the global foreign exchange markets. And I think India, as an emerging economy, growing, as Ambassador Saran said, still at a fairly healthy clip of 6.5%, a young country, quite a few positives in its favor. And similarly with China, though China has started to slow down, and China has already started to age, which is going to be a factor which will dampen growth even further. But I think China and India will have to play a much more active role in the global scene. And this is why the points that we're discussing about India-China standoff is really to the detriment of both. And I hope very much that there will be no miscalculations.
I do hope so. But Ambassador Saran, you know, the general view from the first 6 months of Trump's presidency is that Trump need not be taken too seriously, because after all, he promised many things and he hasn't been able to do many of them, including Obamacare. But I understand that even though the US president's powers are quite constrained in the matter of legislation, when it comes to military offenses, he is fairly empowered. So should we take all the bluster that he's kind of giving vent to against North Korea as possibly something that he could really, suit action towards?
You know, as Rajat pointed out, that it would be a mistake to sort of paint Trump as some kind of a irrational, madman in the same category as Kim Jong-un. And even Kim Jong-un, one can see, as he said, that in terms of regime survival, what he's doing is perhaps not so irrational. But as I tried to explain earlier, that there has been a certain red line which the US had drawn. And this is not just Trump, but I think the US administration in the past also, that the North Korean capability should not cross the line where its nuclear weapon capability, its missile capability can actually threaten the US mainland itself. I think Kim Jong-un is very close to that, if he has not yet made that achievement so far. But if that threshold is crossed, I think right now you see a lot of bluster, so that perhaps this could lead to North Korea stepping back. Perhaps it could lead to a China, which may also be very anxious, because if it is drawn into this conflict, it could have very negative consequences for China itself.
Is it true that the American president, when it comes to military offenses, he really doesn't need the sanction of the Senate and the Congress?
I mean, in terms of declaring war, yes, you need to go to the Congress. But I think in terms of a emergency situation which may arise, the American president can take that action. So I don't think we should depend too much on whether or not Congress will have that kind of restraining. But even the Congress, if it comes to what is seen as an elemental threat to the security of the United States, I do not think that the Congress would stand in the way. So as I mentioned, it is very important that, say, a country like China, which has considerable influence over North Korea. After all, the economic survival of North Korea is very much dependent upon China. It is true that China has not so far exercised the kind of leverage that it could in order to restrain the North Koreans. Everyone is trying to, in a sense, maneuver to a position of advantage, and I think in that kind of a game, we are actually going towards a more dangerous situation.
Okay, so many gathering storm clouds, but there's always a hope that better sense will prevail. But I'm afraid we run out of time completely. So much as I'd like to continue this discussion, I'll have to call an end to it. Bluster or more, we don't know yet. But when someone like Senator John McCain, the Republican senator from Arizona and chairman of the Armed Services Committee, takes exception to President Trump's statements and says that all it's going to do is bring us closer to some kind of serious confrontation, I think we all need to be concerned. Thank you so much, Ambassador Saran. Rajat also for joining me in this discussion. Thank you also for watching. Remember, we'll be back next week with yet another edition of Macros with Mythili. Till then, it's thank you and goodbye from all of us at ET Now. In the meantime, if there's any topic that you'd like to see discussed in this forum, please do write to us at the email ID you see at the bottom of your screen.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/ETNow.